Ah, you're back online. So, how did you find me? I see. Well, you're going to need fixing up. You're in a pretty bad way, but that shouldn't be a problem. All that time I spent on Jakku, I became a pretty decent mechanic. If you just hold still, there shouldn't be a problem. Just get all the tools I need first. We'll start here. Well, Jakku wasn't so bad, but it did get rather lonely. But you know, it was simple back then. I didn't mind it so much. I was waiting for my parents, you see. But sadly they never came. Yeah, it did get rather boring. But that's when I found the droid BB-8. You see, he was caught in the scavenger's net. They're rather crafty, but I managed to rescue him. I'm glad I did actually, because if not for that little droid, things would be rather different now. It just goes to show how important droids really can be. How are you feeling? Good. Yes, well, that's when I found out about the resistance through BB-8, but also I found out about Poe Dameron. He's a pilot in the resistance. He sadly got captured by the First Order, and BB-8 was left behind. That's when eventually he found me. But we can't forget about Finn. You see, Finn helped Poe escape, and their ship crashed on Jakku. And that's when I bumped into Finn, but Finn, see, it's an interesting story because he was actually a stormtrooper, and they don't know their parents from birth. They never know them, never meet them, and so they're moulded to be the perfect soldier, essentially. But Finn was different, and I'm glad. We became great friends. The Force works in mysterious ways. Just hold still a moment. We had quite the adventure together. So, BB-8 eventually led me to a market, and that's where I came across Finn. He was drinking out of some dirty water, not used to being on a desert planet, I suppose. But it was actually BB-8 that spotted him first. BB-8 had told me that he noticed him wearing Poe's jacket. So naturally, I ran at him. Well, you see, he ran away, so that was a little bit suspicious. But when I finally caught up to him, he explained about the resistance and that the jacket belonged to Poe Dameron. Yes, it was rather lucky how it all turned out, really. Anyway, he explained to us that he was part of the resistance, and I'd never met a resistance fighter before, so I was rather excited about that. Well, he told us that Poe had perished in the crash, which turned out not to be true, which is great because he is a valuable fighter. He's one of the greatest pilots I've ever seen. Yeah, well, what happened next was he told us that BB-8 contained a map that would lead to Luke Skywalker. No, I thought Luke Skywalker was a myth, but it turned out to be true. All of it. Well, you see, that's when my skills as a pilot were brought to the test. What happened next? Well, that's when the First Order invaded. There was blasters firing in all directions, so Finn and I, we took off and we went to the nearest ship that we could find. It got blown up, but we found another one. And we took off. Of course, they chased us and tried to shoot us out of the sky, but we made it in one piece. It'd been a long time since I'd piloted, but we managed. We did pretty good, actually. We took a moment to regain our strength, and suddenly the ship got captured. It just seemed like one thing after another. So we hid, naturally, as there was nothing we could do. The ship was rendered pretty much useless and we couldn't move, couldn't fly anywhere, so we hid and we waited. And we waited, and suddenly, bursting through the door was none other than the legendary General Han Solo and Chewbacca of the Rebel Alliance. It turns out that the ship that we had stolen was the Millennium Falcon, and I'm so glad it was. We told Han about the potential map that led to Luke Skywalker that was in BB-8's possession. But before we could continue, some scavengers raided the ship. We fought them off, but it was quite the battle again, as things usually are, especially if you're involved with the Alliance. Anyway, after that, he brought us up to speed and told us everything about Luke and the Force, and that he suspected Luke had gone to find the first Jedi temple that held together the light side and the dark side of the Force, good and evil. I had a feeling something else had gone on, but he never told us at that point. But I eventually found out anyway. We flew to the planet Takodana next, and met a pirate scavenger, or ex-pirate scavenger, called Maz. She's a very wise woman. She's 1,000 years old, but I wouldn't mention it in front of her. In fact, when we got there, Han told us to pretty much not look at or touch anything. Anyway, we spoke to Maz, and she told us more about the First Order and their plans to defeat the Rebel Alliance. Well, I think Finn was still suffering from the trauma of it all, so he tried to take off. Understandable, really, but I couldn't. I knew I had to help. I had to do something. Well, later on, anyway, I heard voices coming from downstairs, so I followed them and came across a trunk. I opened it, and in the trunk turned out to be Luke Skywalker's lightsaber. It was calling to me. I have no idea why at the time, but Maz came down and told me about Luke and the lightsabers, and she told me to take it. But I couldn't. It was all so overwhelming. So, I ran. Despite my best efforts, I ended up running directly into the thing I was trying to avoid. And suddenly, I realised that I already knew I couldn't escape what was to come. Maz said it herself. She told me that the Force moves through every living thing and surrounds us all. Some of us are more sensitive to it than others. Anyway, all of a sudden, through the sky was giant laser beams. They came out of nowhere, devastating. Everybody was running, fleeing for their lives. The castle that we had just come out of, destroyed in minutes. It was like nothing I've ever seen. The beams were powerful enough to destroy planets. And that's exactly what they did. Must have been more than 3, all in one moment. Stupidly, I kept running, like it would solve anything. But that's when BB-8 caught up to me, convinced me to turn around and go back. So I did. Well, we do what we can. At the time I was absolutely terrified. I witnessed firsthand the devastation that the First Order would create. And that's when all of a sudden resistance fighters tore through the sky with such ferocity. It was a rather heroic moment. They were chasing after the fighters that had invaded. They fought well, and they were led by one hell of a pilot. That's when I heard intense crackling behind me. I could almost feel the heat from the blade of the saber. And there stood Kylo Ren for the first time. His voice was distorted through his mask. I shot at him. I don't know if it was bravery or out of fear. He asked me the whereabouts of BB-8, the droid that contained the map to find Luke Skywalker. But turns out I was enough for him, so all of a sudden everything went to black. And I woke up on his ship. Next thing I knew, bound in a chair. I was quite scared, but also curious, wondering what it all meant to him. Finally, he took his helmet off and I saw his face for the first time. It was rather surprising. I expected him to look a little less human. But then it began. He tried to extract the information out of me, but to his surprise, I resisted. I didn't know at the time, and it surprised him, but the tables turned and it's actually I who managed to extract information from him. He was scared that he would never be as strong as Darth Vader. That gave him quite the shock. And then he left in a fit of rage. I didn't have long to escape. It was only a short window. So I managed to use what I knew of the Force and escape. I was looking for a hangar to make my escape, and I turned the corner, and that's when I saw them. Finn, Han and Chewie. They'd come back to rescue me. And for the first time in my whole life, probably, I knew I had family, people that cared about me. I'd never had that before. I was just a lonely scavenger on Jakku, waiting for my parents to come back. That never did. We made it outside into the snow, but we thought, how could we abandon the Alliance? So we went back in. We had explosives this time, and we managed to find the main core of the base, and so we began to lay the explosives. Han and Chewie took off in a different direction to Finn and I. Finn and I had to approach from the outside to get to the top. And next, the unspeakable happened. It was then that I saw Kylo and Han face off in the distance, and I found out that Kylo Ren was actually Han's son, Ben Solo. He had been manipulated into joining the dark side by Supreme Leader Snoke. And next I witnessed firsthand his betrayal of his father. It was devastating to both Finn, I and Chewie. There wasn't anything we could do. We were too far away. But we had to continue. He would have wanted it that way. So, once we had done the job that we needed to do, we left. We ran towards a forest in the distance, trying to board a ship to escape. But we were met by Kylo. So, now was the time to be brave. Lightsaber in hand, we charged towards him. I shot first with my blaster, but it wasn't powerful enough, and Kylo had thrown me some feet into the air. But luckily Finn had the lightsaber at the time, and he fought on. Sadly, we were both knocked down until me and Kylo had a standoff, and I retrieved the lightsaber that had been forced out of Finn's hand, and I ran towards Kylo. This time, I felt different. I reached out for the Force and managed to gain some bravery, and I fought like hell. It was a tough fight. It was perhaps the bravest I'd ever been in my life, up until that point. But we managed it. I faced him down and managed to defeat him. He was badly wounded, but I was concerned about Finn, so I ran back. We then made our way to the ship and escaped, barely with our lives. But I'm glad we got some justice for Han. Let's see how you're doing. let's check your responses. Can you just follow this for me? Good. Keep following. Might be something slightly loose, but you should be okay. I am pretty handy with all these tools, as I say. Comes from being on Jakku. When you're alone, you have to fend for yourself and learn any skills that you can. Anyway, we made it back to the ship and Leia was there. We had all what we needed to find Luke Skywalker, so we pieced the map together and found him on a small island surrounded by ocean. Without the map, it would be useless finding him. It was rather small, so we took off. He was at the top of a rather tall mountain, so I began the climb. I felt all of this time that we spent fighting, finally in that moment it all counted for something. So I climbed and I climbed, and I finally made it to the top, and there was Luke, waiting. He'd sensed my arrival, I'm sure, maybe long before I'd even set off. I'm sure he had hope. Anyway, he pulled down his hood and I outstretched my arm and handed him his lightsaber. And that was that. It's quite amazing, really. As I say, I thought it was a myth, but it all turned out to be true. All of it. Even the sad parts. That's better. You're looking in working order now. Just a few more adjustments. You know, in all the time I've been travelling and adventuring, I never met anybody braver than Finn, Poe, Chewie, Han, Leia. My life completely changed just from meeting that droid, BB-8. It really is funny how the Force works sometimes. It finds us in the end. No matter how hard we try to resist it, it always finds a way. And good always finds a way as well. Just going to check a few more things. Can you follow this again for me? That's great. Just a few more tweaks. And down here. That's good. We should have you fully working. But I would advise that you just take a moment to fully reset. I've done all I can here. Well, maybe you can accompany on my next adventure. But first, maybe we should both rest. And lastly, just want to check again your motor functions. So if you just follow my hand. Yep, lights seem to be working just fine. Good. I rather enjoyed fixing you up. It's been a while since I've had my hand to the tools. Normally it's lightsaber training. Well, think we should both take a break now, so I'm going to turn your system off and we will reboot you tomorrow.